So I live in a dorm on campus at my college. I was back a week early during winter break for Greek recruitment, basically interviewing with and visiting different sororities. And the only people on campus were a few other students doing the same and a skeleton crew. They didn't have the cleaning company, dining hall staff, or even our resident assistants around. There were 4 dorm towers, 12 floors each. I was the only one on my floor, and one of only a few in the entire tower. To get up to the dorm this week, you had to check in with the front desk to get your key activated. If you didn't have a key coded to a specific tower or room, you wouldn't even be able to access the elevator. Now, I was in my room on the second night of the week. I had settled back in and sitting on my futon, back against one of the armrests and facing the door. The rooms were your typical long rectangles, with a window on one end and a door on the other. My bed was lofted above me, and a blanket was hanging down, so you essentially couldn't see me from the doorway. I was lying there with my headphones in, scrolling through YouTube videos, when I heard the door opening. Not only was there a distinct sound of the key card going in, like a hotel room door, I also have Christmas ornaments hanging from the ceiling. I knew that the door had opened all the way, because it had hit an ornament, causing it to fall off its hook. I froze in fear. I knew my roommate wasn't back, and neither was my RA, and those are the only 2 people that would have access to my room. My first thought was that whoever this was would realize their mistake and quickly back out, kind of like opening an occupied bathroom stall. But as I sat there, barely breathing, I heard them taking 2 steps forward and even bumping into my suitcase, which was taking up most of the doorway. I adjusted slightly, moving to reach my phone, causing my futon to squeak. Instantly, the footsteps retreated and the door closed. I was stuck where I was for maybe an hour, until I could finally muster up the courage to get up. There on the ground was the broken ornament, and my suitcase sitting slightly ajar. I texted my roommate and my RA, practically begging them to tell me that they were back, but my roommate was still in London, and my RA confirmed my worst fears, but she also had no idea who would be able to get into my room. Even if the cleaning people or maintenance guys were back, they didn't have permission to go into the dorms, nor any way to get in. She assured me she would let the front desk know, and also suggested it was probably a spring admission student who had gotten the wrong key. I accepted that as an answer. They were confused, heard the futon, and realized they had got the wrong room. It would never happen again if that was it. But I still struggled to sleep that night. I even felt terrified to turn around and look at the door when I woke up the next morning. Night returned, unable to sleep and still very scared. I was once again up late browsing Reddit. This time I had my phone close to me and had taped a piece of string over the door, since I no longer had my ornament alarm. I needed to validate that I wasn't going crazy. Once again at 3 a.m., I heard heavy footsteps outside my door. The distinct use of a keycard, and my door opening up. I stayed perfectly still, and I realized I could see a reflection of a silhouette in the microwave's door, which sat against the window facing the doorway. They stood there and nearly filled up the entire doorway, the light from the hallway streaming around them into my dark room. I once again found myself frozen, convinced whoever this person was had ill intent. Last night wasn't a mistake. I hit play on a video I had queued up, and as soon as the ad started playing, the figure left and the door closed behind them, and the footsteps retreated. I told my RA and my roommate about this, as well as the front desk, the next morning. All of them confirmed that no one else had a registered key for my floor in my tower. whether it was another student or employees. I didn't sleep for the rest of that week and kept my suitcase and chair in front of the door, but it never happened again. But even now, months later, that 9x20 room is terrifying to me whenever I'm there alone at night, since whoever comes through that door is only a few steps away from my bed and blocks the only way out.
I used to deliver on a paper route when I was 13. It was that sort of old school route where I'd hustle every morning around 6 a.m. with a satchel, dropping off the daily paper to houses. It was a pretty cool gig, simple and pretty much exactly what you'd expect. The one lame part about the job was that it was rain or shine. No matter the weather, even if it was pitch black with a blizzard, the paper was getting delivered. That's probably why they used to hire kids back in the day. It was easier to pressure them to go, and they had to walk that route either way. One day, I was dropping off papers as usual in the morning. It was winter and still dark. These were my favorite shifts because it felt like the whole world hadn't quite turned on yet. It was cool seeing all the homes nice and cozy, maybe a wisp or two of smoke still escaping the chimneys. It's just nostalgic for no reason, maybe because of the holidays. I slogged on through the dark. The few streetlights that guided my route cast dim yellow glares into the snowdrifts beneath them. I remember it being extra still and ominous. I would periodically stop between houses to catch my breath, but it was really to survey the neighborhood. I still can't put my finger on it, even to this day, but I remember just feeling weird that morning. Something was off, but not anything I was aware of. All I could do was push on through the cold and get the job done. Shortly after passing a house at the end of a cul-de-sac, I heard 2 loud pops, followed by a third a minute later. I grew up around guns and knew that sound, but I just carried on with my route. I figured it was someone getting their car started and the exhaust backfired or something. I'd seen that happen to my dad's truck before, and other cars around town, so I knew it was a possibility. In my 13-year-old brain, it was way more likely than 3 consecutive gunshots. I waited to say anything to anyone until later on that morning. It's just one of those things you don't want to mention because you don't know the gravity of the situation. When I mentioned what I'd heard, my parents immediately told me that it was all in my head. It probably was just a car backfiring. It did put me at ease, and I just went on with my day. That confirmed what I was so desperate to believe. Later that morning, my neighborhood was full of police and news vans, centered around the house. They were clamoring for neighbors or anyone who'd been around the cul-de-sac that morning. My parents told me to stay inside, but the truth is that I would have never gone to speak to them. Just like when I hesitated to tell my parents, I felt like I was doing something awful when I told them about what I heard. It felt disrespectful, strange, and very ominous. It felt wrong. I didn't know every single neighbor that we had at the time, but if any of them were dead, I wouldn't have the stomach to hear the news. That was a heavy realization too, that the paper boy knew first. Maybe that is why I hesitated. I would be speaking about people I didn't know at all, and it felt very sad to me. You may be able to tell this story gave me a lifetime of very quiet, suffocating PTSD. We got the full story as it was pieced together throughout the week. The man who lived in the house was older, at least older than my dad, and had been a local for a very long time. He had a son who was in the army, and had been away for some time. He went through a deployment of some kind. I don't know the exact military details, but he eventually came home to visit his father. When he arrived back at home, he wasn't alone. He brought another guy with him, and then proceeded to come out to his father as gay. The other guy was his boyfriend. No one really knew any of the details beyond that, other than how the visit concluded. The dad shot and killed them both that morning, then immediately turned the gun on himself. This is all speculation, but I imagine it was a cold visit for them, even colder with a half-foot of snow, burying the house and clogging up the streets. It was probably the morning they were planning on heading back to the base or wherever they lived. The father just couldn't take it. Couldn't leave them like that. It's a tragedy and impacted the entire community, but no one more than me. I didn't deliver another paper for a while. Everyone was pretty understanding as to why. Even the newspaper editor. The talk of the town, but for me, it was a memory. It's like I was the fourth man in the room when it happened or something. Be good to yourselves out there.
I never liked being home alone, especially at night. The creaks and groans of the old house seemed to take on a life of their own, echoing throughout the empty rooms like ghostly whispers. On this particular evening, my parents had gone out for a dinner party, leaving me with the usual instructions to lock up and stay safe. As the clock ticked away, I tried to distract myself with a movie, the soft glow of the TV casting flickering shadows around the living room. The ambience, however, did little to ease the uneasy feeling settling in my stomach. Every small noise made me jump, and the wind outside rattled the windows like a chorus of distant whispers. I decided to retreat to my bedroom, convinced that the comfort of my own space would dispel the growing sense of dread. But as I climbed into bed and pulled the covers tight, an unsettling feeling lingered in the air. Suddenly a chill swept through the room, and I noticed a draft that seemed to come from the hallway. I dismissed it, attributing the sensation to the old house's quirks. Just as I closed my eyes, I heard something soft, almost imperceptible. It was footsteps. My eyes shot open, and I strained to listen. The rhythmic sound echoed throughout the quiet house, each step deliberate and intentional. Panic set in as I realized the footsteps weren't mine. The realization hung heavy in the air, and I lay frozen in bed, my ears tuned to the haunting cadence. Unable to resist, I cautiously slipped out of bed, my bare feet meeting the cold floor. The hallway stretched out before me, dimly lit by the soft glow of the moon filtering through the curtains. The footsteps continued, growing louder with each passing moment. Against my better judgment, I followed the sound, a lump forming in my throat. The steps led me down the corridor and into the heart of the darkness. The air felt charged with an inexplicable energy, and a sense of foreboding washed over me. As I approached the end of the hallway, the footsteps abruptly ceased. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood there trembling, my eyes straining to pierce the shadows. That's when I saw it. A figure, vague and indistinct, standing just beyond the reach of the feeble moonlight. My heart raced and a chill ran down my spine as the figure then turned to face me. Panic consumed me, and I stumbled backward, retreating to the safety of my room. I locked the door, my breath shallow and rapid. I called 911, and shortly after I heard sirens and saw the flashing lights. They called my parents, and then what do you know? The police came out of my house with a very skinny and creepy looking guy. They took him away, and I never saw him again after that night.
This happened 20 years ago. I was driving back home with my girlfriend at the time. It was Christmas Eve, and my mother's family used to hold a large celebration at my aunt's house in Estacada. This was my girlfriend's first time meeting with my extended family, but she got on quite well with them. We spent the majority of the afternoon and evening talking, playing poker, opening presents, and drinking an assortment of adult beverages. My girlfriend had been quite inebriated by the time we had to leave, therefore, I would be driving us home. It was around 11 p.m. or so, and I was driving my girlfriend's car along Highway 211. Now, this stretch of road is surrounded by farms and dense patches of forest. There are parts of it that are completely unlit, but nothing to fear. I grew up in this area, so I knew this road like the back of my hand. Both of us were just driving and talking away. There's a portion of the highway that descends down an enormous hill before crossing Deep Creek. Surrounding both sides of the road is a thick forest. The only thing that we could see was the area directly in front of our headlights. I drove down the hill, crossed the bridge, then back uphill, through more forest. It was when the highway begins to flatten out again that it happened. Something sprints across the road so quickly, I nearly hit whatever it was. I slam on the brakes. I turned to my girlfriend. "Hey, did you just see that?" She confirmed that she had, but couldn't make out what it was. Maybe it was a coyote. They're a fairly common sight around this area, but something felt off about this entire situation. Whatever it was ran out in front of the car, then disappeared into the woods. Coyotes usually don't dart out in front of cars like that. So, for some reason, I decided to check it out. I turned the car around and switched on the high beams to illuminate the forest. I then stepped out of the car and began walking towards the woods. I don't see anything, but as I drew closer to the tree line, it feels like perhaps I had made a grave mistake. My heart was pounding, and the hairs on the back of my neck were now standing at full attention. I don't see anything unusual in the trees. Then suddenly, the car horn blasts. I hurried back to the car and asked my girlfriend what was going on. She didn't say anything. Instead, she pointed to a spot about 50 feet from where I was standing. I look over in that direction, and that's when I saw it. Without a doubt, this was the thing that ran in front of our car. It appeared to be a man, completely naked. His skin was covered in mud, and in one of his hands, he was holding a hatchet. He looked back at us, and then he smiled, then waved, just before turning around and walking back into the forest. Needless to say, we got the hell out of there. Once we were safely on the road again, my girlfriend explained what had just happened. While I was trying to look for the man in the direction that he initially vanished in, he circled around and came out from another spot in the forest beyond the car's headlights. My girlfriend had seen something out of the corner of her eye, and that's when she spotted him. Before she honked the horn, he was walking toward me, his hatchet raised as if making to strike me. We called the authorities once we safely got back home, but they never found anybody. The officer we spoke to explained his theory. The man was looking to ambush unsuspecting travelers. We all agreed that my girlfriend's quick thinking saved my life that night, as it let my potential murderer know that I wasn't alone out there. I moved back into that area recently, so now I drive on that highway often. There hasn't been any naked hatchet man sightings yet, but I can tell you that I'm definitely extra vigilant now, especially whenever I'm near Deep Creek.
I know a lot of people out there would stay home alone at a very young age due to their parents working night shifts, but in my case, I was never able to stay home alone. One day when I was 15, I thought I was old enough to stay home alone. My parents were going to the store really quick to get some last-minute things for dinner. I was too lazy to go just for a couple of items, and I wanted to stay home and watch a movie that I had recorded on TV. After whining to my mom that they weren't going to be gone for a long time, I convinced her to let me stay. As she was leaving and telling me 1,000 times to make sure the door was locked and to not open the door for anyone, I then rushed into the living room and turned on the TV. Our home has 2 doors. There's a door on the right side where the driveway is, and a door on the left side where the living room is. We don't ever use the left door, and this is something all of our family and friends know. If I ever had a friend coming over, I always made sure they knew to knock on the right side door. Even when we get deliveries, I always leave a side note saying to please use the right door. My family and I make jokes about the left side of our home looking abandoned since we don't use it. My mom focuses on cleaning the right side. Anyway, as I turned on the TV and laid down on the sofa, I suddenly heard a loud knock on the left side door. I paused, thinking maybe it was the TV, but then I heard it again. I turned off the TV and ran towards the hallway, I didn't dare to look out the window. I was scared that it would have been more noticeable. As I was in the hallway, I was peeking towards the door. It felt like I could see how the door vibrated each time the person outside was knocking on the door. I didn't know what to do or who it could be. Everyone I know knows to use the right side door. I was so scared that my legs gave up on me, and I sat down as I looked at the door. The knocking then got even louder. I don't even think it was a knock anymore. It was more like full-on punches. After what felt like hours, it eventually stopped. I sat there crying when I suddenly heard the right side door then open. It was my dad. I looked up at him and I actually felt anger because I thought it was him who was knocking. I was immediately convinced that my parents did this to scare me, but my dad was just genuinely worried and asking why I was crying. I told him what happened, and after he clarified that it wasn't him or my mom who was knocking, he told me that my mom kept saying, "What if something happens to her while she's home alone? How are we going to live with that?" So she apparently made my dad drive back to the house to get me. As I came outside and looked at my mom in the car with a worried look, I started to really wonder if I had made it up. Did the knocking really happen? Or deep down, was I just really scared to actually stay home alone? In the car, I asked my parents if they saw anyone walking as they reached the house, but they said there was no one. It's been 7 years, and to this day, I still wonder if someone was really out there.